So Brian, right now there's been quite a lot of discussion, particularly from some of the senators about changing the liability status for employers to negate some of the risk of bringing employees back into a COVID-19 environment, right? So how do you see that element of risk and really liability for employers playing out in the next 6, 12, 18 months?
That's a good question. And as you can imagine, most of the things that we hear are, scuttlebutt. Who knows really what's going to happen? But I can tell you, most of this stuff is going to be lawyer driven to a certain extent. When you look at organizations like the American Bar Association, they've started wrestling with this idea and discussing different concepts. What most people in the know are talking about is a possible guideline system that says, hey, here's the minimum standard. Here's the things that you're going to need to be able to do in order to say you're going to get any kind of waiver from liability. What I expect is that's going to be based on a reasonableness standard. I think there will be very specific things that will be identified, like a manner in which you sanitize, things like that Dr. Schnur referred to of how do you question people, how do you make sure that you're asking them basic questions that is at least going to elicit information about whether or not they could be sick. I think you're going to be talking about masks for the next 6 to 12 months. So I think there's going to be very clear things that you're going to need to do at a base level or a minimum level to be able to at least claim any kind of protection under any kind of statute, if there is a statute presented. What you find, though, in this area of the law is typically, two cases, right? Premises liability, you're bringing people onto your premises. How safe are they when they're there? And then number two, workers' compensation law, when you're talking about how are you managing that patient, that employee, and what are you having to manage related to their injury that they get at work, i.e. exposure to COVID-19 and getting that infection or that disease inside your place of work. So I think what you're going to find is while there will be some bright line rules, every statute typically has reasonableness applied to it. So I think those standards are going to vary based on the size of the employer. For example, you will have a soda shop and you're a one guy shop and you sell sodas during the day. The standard that you're going to be having of managing the safety of your bathroom and how your process and your procedures are going to be a little different than the standard of McDonald's, who has, is a multinational billions of dollars of company, that they're going to have a greater standard to produce an environment, and they should have more knowledge to be able to do that. So I think there's going to be some flexibility in that standard. I do think there's going to be some hardline rules, but I think you are at this point to prepare for that potential liability. You need to ask yourself as an employer, what is reasonable given the current market, the current products and services available to me to provide for the safety of my employees and customers.
So obviously when you're talking about multinationals, they have staffs of HR that they can throw at these problems. But for someone like Josh, who has a moderately sized small business, what would you recommend as, how does he get his head around the standard operating procedures that he's going to need in order to come back to business in a safe and also risk tolerant way?
That's a good question. I think, there's various different methods. It sounds like, Josh is definitely on the right as far as identifying high risk individuals. He's on the right track as saying, let me bring people back over a period of time. So a lot of the things that Josh is saying are the right things that you need to be thinking about as an employer. The challenge that folks like Josh are faced with is who actually makes those decisions on who stays home, who gets tested, who's going to be a high risk person. All of those decisions are truly a clinician decision. Those are what doctors do. They diagnose. So when you talk about what an employer can do, I think there's going to be various methodologies that you can offload that risk for a cost-effective process for folks like Dr. Schnurr and clinicians across the country to be able to make those critical decisions about, for example, who should come back to work? Do you have somebody to offload that liability? That I had a physician make a determination that these people were safe through their protocol, through their questioning. I had somebody does get sick, they have an opportunity to speak with that individual, or a board certified doctor will make the determination who needs a test, who needs to get screened. What we don't want as small employers or even as large employers is to be able to make that decision. Somebody has COVID, turns up positive, and then you're stuck with the HR and owner making a decision about who needs to go home, And so what I found is that my clients and people that talk to me are concerned that if they have a COVID positive patient that turns up in their workplace, they've got to send everybody home again. And that's just not an effective way to reopen and reestablish your business. I think that's where we can lean on folks like Dr. Schnurr and also just healthcare providers in general of making decisions that say, here's where the medical science lays. Here's the decisions that we can make. Maybe because of the way in which you determined who that employee came in contact with, we can have a clinician make a decision that says, hey, these are the 12 people out of your 80 or 100 that need to be quarantined for the next 14 days. But I'd suggest as an attorney, my instinct tells me I don't want to make that decision as an owner of a business unless I have specialized knowledge. And that's where I think that liability risk you can mitigate. Now, do I think am I telling you to hire your own board certified doctor and put them on staff at your business? Absolutely not. That wouldn't be reasonable. No group would expect that that's a reasonable application for a folks of 100 employee business. So I think that, given that, the great thing about Americans is that we have ingenuity, and there's opportunities for services that are coming up, all across the medical field to provide for some of those benefits. And I think that's where I think employers need to be turning to kind of look and say, how do I offset that liability, get it off my plate so I'm not making those clinical decisions. I'm letting somebody else deal with those clinical decisions while still, using your common business sense to say, what's right for my business? What's cost effective? What do I think is reasonable?